thank you all for coming. Hello to members, the public, and Anne and her husband for coming out on such a bleak day. The Friends is a new group, and we got together in June, tossed around some ideas, and got together. We formed an executive and met once a month over the summer and put a structure in place for our Friends group. And basically, it is to support the library, either through volunteer work or fundraising. We have a website now, a link on the website. We have an email address, friends.rideaulakeslibrary@gmail.com. And if you have any questions at any time, please access that link to our Gmail account. Mary Haskins and I, we're co-presidents, will respond to you as soon as we can. The purpose of the Friends group, as you know, as I said, was to support the library and all of its aims to increase literacy. And towards that goal, we are charging a modest membership fee, which we use for administration purposes, to put on events for supplies, photocopying, things like that. The fundraising goals today was taken from a wish list submitted by Sue Warren. Sue's here. She and her staff have done a fabulous job with the library. It's been difficult because there are 5 branches. Although Elgin is a separate one, we are widespread. And so there's always a need for more help, more money. And the Friends would like, our goal today, we got from the wish list, and it is to fund or hopefully achieve a goal of $500 with our fundraising this year to support the Boxes of Books program. These are bins of children's books that parents and caregivers can take home and borrow. And since the aim is to increase literacy, it's good to start at a very young age. Today, our featured author is Raina, and she will be talking about Clara's Rib. We have been fortunate to have the Elgin Book Club supply the refreshments. Would you all stand, please? Thank you very much. And after Joan speaks a little bit about Anne and how she knows her, then after Anne's talk on Clara's Rib, then we can retire to have refreshments, coffee, tea. Thank you very much for coming. We appreciate your support.
This is a really good turnout on a cool Tuesday afternoon in the rain. Thank you so much for showing up like this. This is wonderful. Before I introduce Anne, I would like to thank Barb and Jim Rowett, many of you would know them, for lending us the decorations today. They had a florist shop in Smiths Falls for a long time and have collected decorations, I'm sure, for every occasion, which they store at their home, and they were kind enough to let us borrow them today and make things a little more festive. So, Anne, I first became acquainted with Anne because I received an emergency call from another book club. Anne Overdove, from another Elgin book club, called me up and said that they had a marvelous speaker coming, but due to unforeseen circumstances, most of her book club couldn't make it that day, illness and emergencies. Would I be able to go to fill up the space? So I rounded up a few people in a hurry who are in the audience here, and we went over to Mary Kirby's and listened to Anne speak. And I was so moved by the message that Anne told that I actually bought her book. I never buy books, Anne. I borrow them from from the library. I support the library and I borrow my books, and when I'm done I hand them back and I don't have to store them. I bought your book and I had it autographed because it was such an amazing message. It's a message of a very sad time in Canadian history, a time when a disease was running rampant and the treatment was very primitive. And somebody mentioned to me just a few minutes ago, it's like Ebola right now. They're starting to get a handle on it, I heard last night. But up to this point, they've been just experimenting and trying their best to do things, and gradually a treatment evolves. So Anne, my book club decided we would invite Anne back, and she came in the spring. We were at the Cove, and we had a very nice time there, and Anne, your message was just as fresh at that time to me. And so I thought, what better person to come and speak to this fairly inaugural meeting, we've had one other one, of the Friends of the Library, than to invite you to come back. You and Grant, your chauffeur, Grant, who drives Anne around. And without further ado, come and speak to us, please.
Thank you very much, Joan. Good afternoon, everyone. It's really nice to be here today to take part in this exciting and very worthwhile initiative to form Friends of the Library group. And I really invite you, Joan, or thank you, Joan, for inviting me. So some of you have heard me speak before, and it's always a pleasure to see familiar faces, and also it's a real pleasure to meet some of you for the first time. For those of you who don't already know this, there's something I clarify at the beginning of my talk. So if any of you have entered my name on the internet, you may have found a surprise. Somewhere out in the world is another person named Raina, whose name is spelled exactly the same as mine, and she writes erotica. Yes. So I just wanted to tell you I'm not that Raina. And if you're disappointed to hear that, now would be the time for you to leave. I'm really pleased to share some of my sisters and my story with you. But Clara's rib is not just Clara's story and my family's story, but it's a story of a particular time in Canada's history when TB ravaged thousands of families. So it is a story of many people. It also tells of the first uses of penicillin and streptomycin and covers history of the Ottawa area as well. And coincidentally, it was 100 years ago in 2010 when my book came out that the Royal Ottawa TB Sand had opened in Ottawa. I'm the youngest of 10 children, 7 of whom spent years in the Royal Ottawa Sanatorium for the treatment of tuberculosis in the 1930s, 40s, and 50s. My eldest brother John died of tuberculosis when he was 18. My brother Billy died at age 4 of TB meningitis, and my father entered the sand when I was 6 years old, and he died shortly after I turned 8. Clara entered the sand when she was 12 and was discharged for the final time when she was 26. 34 years ago, based on her daily diary notes, she wrote her life story focusing on her years growing up in the sand. And shortly before she died in 1998, she gave me all her diaries, her draft manuscript, and she even had a taped version of what she had written. And she had no expectations for me to do anything with this material. She told me I could throw it in the garbage or do whatever I wanted with it. She just trusted me to use my own judgment. I, however, promised her that one day I would publish her story, and I would not have made that promise if I had not believed it was a story that should be told. Life intervened, and I had been struck with numerous disabling and very painful autoimmune disorders, but with the encouragement of my husband, tour manager, ever faithful happy, road manager, Grant Cameron, my children, Kellyanne and Mark McGahey, my friends and family, I finally brought this promise to fulfillment. So I didn't change a word of what Clara had written, but I did add chapters to complete the book. I have experienced myriad emotions in co-authoring this book with my dear sister and friend who was 17 years older than me. And I am quite simply overwhelmed and deeply humbled with the response to Clara's rib. I am exceedingly grateful for the support, friendship, and wonderful reviews of the book done by Dr. Peter Jessamine and Dr. Bill Jeans. Dr. Jessamine currently treats people in Ottawa with tuberculosis, and his father, Dr. Gordon Jessamine, was a former superintendent at the Ottawa SAN. Dr. Bill Jeans, sadly recently deceased, was the former medical director of the Canadian Tuberculosis Association. One can't really think of TB without thinking of the Canadian Lung Association and its affiliate provincial offices. It was the Lung Association who brought about the creation of the first sanatoria for the treatment of tuberculosis in the early 1900s, with money raised through the Christmas Seal campaign. Until then, only people from very wealthy families were admitted to hospital to be treated for tuberculosis. So the Lung Association certainly impacted on the treatment that all my family members received. Grant and I drove directly from the printers on November 18, 2010 to the Lung Association's national office in Ottawa, and I felt that was the most appropriate place for the first copy of Clara's rib to go. And I signed it to the association on behalf of all my family. How very fortunate, so many years after its formation, that the Lung Association continues to be a valuable resource offering support, education, and guidance for those with tuberculosis, as well as in many other areas of health care. And this is of particular significance because, contrary to popular belief, according to the World Health Organization, tuberculosis is second only to HIV/AIDS as the greatest killer worldwide due to a single infectious agent. In 2012, 8.6 million people fell ill with TB, and 1.3 million people died of TB. And according to Health Canada, there are about 1,600 new cases of tuberculosis reported in Canada every year, with a real outbreak again up north. Clara's life held a great deal of sadness, but for me, the setbacks and obstacles were not what defined who Clara was. Clara's indomitable spirit, her faith, her courage, and humor that conquered all challenges was who she was. And so for me, this is what makes her life not a sad story, but a very happy and triumphant story. I would like you to meet Clara first as a 12-year-old, and because this is the turning point of her whole life, I'll read some of her in-depth description of that period. So this is Clara speaking as a 12-year-old. In the early part of September 1939, John was admitted into the SAN. The rest of the family went for chest x-rays, and we soon learned that the chest pains we were having were actually pleurisy pains. Ralph, 14, George, 7, and I, Clara, 12, would have to quit school and go on the cure. This really upset me, and I emphatically protested that I was not too sick to go to school. Ralph was already in the SAN when word came for me to enter on Monday, September 25th, 1939, and that was 75 years ago, this past September 1939. In 1939, the treatment or cure for TB consisted mainly of bed rest and fresh air. The windows were kept wide open day and night, winter and summer. The TB bacteria requires oxygen to grow, and so while you can get TB anywhere in your body, It is more prevalent in the lungs, and it would actually eat a hole or a cavity in the lung. The theory was that if the diseased part of the lung could be deprived of oxygen, then the lung might be able to heal itself. Some patients received pneumothorax, which temporarily collapsed the diseased lung for as long as it required it to heal, if it ever did. So pneumothorax involved injecting air between the chest wall and the outer part of the lung. In other words, into the pleural cavity, and injecting enough air until the upper part of the lung collapsed. And that treatment was repeated every week or every couple of weeks and could last for as long as 4 or 5 years, as it did for my brother Ralph, who's here today. For many others for whom pneumothorax was not an option, there was the more drastic thoracoplasty surgery, which involved removing several ribs so the diseased upper part of the lung could be permanently collapsed. So we have 24 ribs. Clara had 11 ribs removed. My brother Ralph had 7 ribs removed, and my brother George had 13 ribs removed. And just as I mentioned, my brother Ralph is here, and a little interesting fact about him. He spent many years in the SAN as well, and when he was in his early 20s, he asked the doctor what his prognosis was, and that he was told never to expect to leave the SAN alive. So Ralph actually, last March 24th, which happens to be World Tuberculosis Day, Ralph turned 89. So back to Clara speaking. Ralph and I continued to improve. Meanwhile, John's condition was steadily worsening. On December 13th, 1939, the nurse told me my parents were waiting downstairs and that I was to join them and Ralph. As it was not a visiting day, I immediately thought John must be dead, and I did not want it to be so. I wanted a miracle. However, there was no miracle, and John had died that morning at age 18. Ralph and I were both discharged from the sanatorium on March 2nd, 1940. It was so good to be home with our family and to meet our dear little brother Billy, born January 17th. The following week was a time of great excitement as I was back in school again. It was now March, and I had been away from school since the early part of September. Would I get my year and be promoted with the rest of the class? The months passed, and the day finally arrived when we received our report cards, and I was promoted into grade 8 with honors. When school reopened in September 1940, I was in grade 8, and I was beginning to think of high school and about my future. I dreamed of going to the Immaculata High School in Ottawa. Later on, when I would join the working force, I would be very cautious with my money so I could afford to buy a riding horse. I continued to dream, and I still loved outdoor activities. Finally, on May 13th, 1941, as prearranged, I went to the SAN for another x-ray and was told to return in 1 week for the results. A week later, May the 20th, dawned bright and beautiful, and I enjoyed walking the half mile to attend 7 o'clock Mass and to receive Holy Communion. I returned home for breakfast and then headed to school. This was all done in haste, so I would have time to play ball before the bell rang at 9. During morning class, I thought of what lay ahead and carefully made plans for the remainder of the day. I rushed home at noon and ate hastily. Then I changed my clothes and hurried back to school so I could play ball before leaving for my 2 p.m. medical appointment at the SAN. From the look on Dr. Lehman's face, I knew that all was not well, and as the expression goes, my heart sank right down into my shoes. The day was no longer beautiful and sunny, and I knew the bomb was about to fall. Then Dr. Lehman told me I would have to go back on the cure. I was to remain in bed at home for 1 month. If there wasn't any improvement, they would readmit me into the sanatorium. A few weeks later, there was one day of rejoicing when Louis came home from school with my grade 8 certificate. Now, all I had to do was get well, and I would be off to high school. I did not realize that when I walked out of the classroom on May 20th, 1941, that it was my final exit as a student. All those dreams I had a few months earlier would never come true. There would be no Immaculata High School for me, nor would there ever be a riding horse. And I never would become a member of the working force. As gloomy as the world seemed that day, it was fortunate I couldn't see into the future. And at age 15, a year after her readmission to the SAN, during which time she had been on a routine of bed rest and was allowed up only for bathroom privileges, Clara wrote in May 1942, "Ethel, Teresa, and I were put on 15 minutes of walking exercise, so now we can walk along Carling Avenue. We are 3 very happy and excited girls." But Clara's excitement was not to last long, and she certainly did not receive any birthday presents of good health when she turned 16 in October 1942. In fact, a few weeks later, she was put back to bed. Her x-ray had worsened. So Clara always seemed to follow a pattern of a little improvement being followed by a marked downturn in her health, and some of her entries for April and May 1943 confirm this. "Things are getting progressively worse. I have pains and pleurisy in my left side as the disease continues to spread. Dr. Carmichael told me that I need thoracolplasty surgery, and I will have several ribs removed. However, there is one great blessing. My right lung is still perfect." I received a letter from Helen Visty in Alberta, and she enclosed a gopher's tail to remind me of my childhood in the West. It is so good to have something to chuckle about at this stressful time. And Clara called the next chapter Ribbed and Deribbed. On November 24th, 1943, at 17 years and 1 month of age, she wrote, "Dr. Carmichael removed 3 ribs from my left side with the assistance of Dr. Robert Pritchard." 9 days later, December 3rd, 1943, is one of my favorite entries. And Clara wrote, "I received some very exciting news. Mother gave birth to a daughter at the Grace Hospital in Ottawa, and the baby will be named Margaret Ann." Anne is the 3rd daughter and 10th child in our family. I am so eager to meet my new sister, but I haven't any idea when that might be. And still at age 17, there were always the days that there was not much to laugh about. And on March 17, 1944, Clara recounted an all too common experience. "My roommate Marcella died today, and she was only 19 years old. Now her wishes to be buried in a white dress will be granted. Marcella's mother brought the dress to the hospital a few days ago to show her daughter, and then they showed it to me. I used to go in to see Marcella and would pray with her when she was alone. The last visit left me very upset. The room felt like death. It seemed so cold. I'll never get used to my friends dying. It is awful." And 5 days later, on March 22nd, 1944, Dr. Carmichael removed 4 more ribs from my left side, so that makes a total of 7 ribs out. And a few days later, after supper, Doctors Carmichael and Pritchard brought in a 2-pound shot bag that I will have to wear underneath a tight binder to help keep the upper part of the left lung collapsed. Each section contains half a pound of BB shots, and that was worn for 5.5 months. So you can imagine how uncomfortable that would be. First of all, the surgery itself was very drastic surgery, and then this very constricted breathing with this 2-pound shot bag under a tight binder. Sunday, May 21st, 1944. Billy was buried today, and I wasn't able to go to his funeral. After the funeral, Dad and Mother came, and they brought wee Anne along with them. The nurses moved my bed close to the window so I could look down and see my little sister for the very first time. She is a little darling, and I long to hold her. So much joy and so much sorrow, all in the same day. And these words quite accurately describe the reality of Clara's medical situation for years. One day things would just look a tiny bit better, and the next day, oh, so much worse. But the other constant was Clara's ability to remain positive and to enjoy enormous comfort from her very deep faith. And a good example of her entire philosophy is evident in her next entry. Joy at what she was given, and no complaint at what she did not have. And I always say that Clara had her own yardstick to measure happiness. On Monday, December 4th, 1944, at age 18, Clara wrote, "Dr. Pritchard has given me permission to get out of bed once a day to go to the bathroom. I am so excited. I have been a complete bed patient for almost 3 months this time. Miss Clement put me on the stretcher and washed my hair for the first time in over 3 months, and it sure felt good. This has been a very happy day. I had a good shampoo, and I was up to the bathroom." And it's really important to remember when these young people were spending like weeks and months for years in bed, we're talking about the days before there was TV, computer games, cell phones, iPods, iPads, no internet, no schooling there, and no physio. So they were really making their own entertainment and just visiting with one another. Clara kept her diaries and did a lot of praying. In December 1944, Clara recounts a series of events that I find really remarkable in the gamut of emotions and range of experiences that are encountered. It's one of my favorite segments for that reason, but time allows me to recount only a portion of the whole interplay, and they all revolve around a nurse Clara has named Waxy. Here in the sand, the nurses are each assigned a certain number of patients to look after, and most of these patients are allowed up for full bathroom privileges. However, Waxy does have one bed patient to look after, and I just happen to be that unfortunate creature. Right from the start, Waxy informed me that she did not come here to carry bedpans, but came because she is lonesome. Nor does she like to give bed baths. These things make her legs sick. I soon realized that her head is more sick than her legs are. I am the big thorn in Mrs. Waxy's side, and every day she approaches me with a new scheme. Since she just hates carrying bedpans, she says, "Will I ask to be moved to another room so a different nurse will look after me?" Another plan that she frequently torments me with is, since I have been in the sand for years and am really not making any headway, why not just quit fighting and allow myself to die? Waxy refuses to give up, and with every bedpan that she brings and with each bed bath that she gives, she lets me know that caring for me is way below her dignity. Waxy is crude, and her conversations are usually downright filthy. So I mentioned earlier that Clara had actually recorded the part that she has written, and I'm now going to play a short segment in Clara's own words, and you will be able to glean for yourself Clara's great affection for Waxy. Not so much.
As much as we dislike Waxy, we are still able to laugh. Waxy always likes attention and occasionally sings to us. And as she sings, she flutters her eyelids and puts on quite a performance. The other day, I foolishly remarked that I knew I would crack up if Waxy ever again sings for us. After all the years that I spent here in the sanatorium, I should have known better than to have made a remark like that. Later, when our supper trays were before us, one of the girls said to Waxy, "Clara just loves your singing, so will you please sing Ave Maria for her?" Waxy was so flattered and hastily prepared for her performance. She came beside my bed and put one of her fat legs up on the chair. Then she opened as she gave her rendition of Ave Maria. I made every effort to remain calm, but my stomach began to quiver, and finally the quivering rose up into my throat, and I couldn't contain myself any longer. And along with the giggles, up came my whole supper. It was all...
I think Waxy is jinxing this. Okay, along with the giggles, up came her whole supper. So Waxy never knew why her stomach turned, but Clara says she still laughs every time she thinks about it. So I'm really sorry about that. 99.99 times, it's fine, but today it's got a little... So the reason I like that so much is, if you ask what my sister Clara was like, I think this says it all. Here's a nurse who hated her, told her she should let herself die, and yet Clara can find something so funny about the situation with Waxy. And so she could just always see the positive side. May 1946, 19 years of age. My test results are not encouraging. I'm told that the only thing that could cure me would be thoracoplasty surgery on my right side, but they have decided against it. My resistance is not good enough. Then the doctor concluded that I will just have to wait until they get a new drug out for TB, if they ever will. I guess my case is almost hopeless unless a miracle happens. At least God is giving me ample time to prepare myself. January 1947, 20 years of age. One thing is certain, without surgery and with a cavity the size of a 50-cent piece in my right lung, my next move will be to the cemetery, and I'm not ready yet to die without a fight. No matter how small my chance is with surgery, I still want this chance. And so for 11 months, Clara fought to have that horrible thoracoplasty surgery on her right side. And she was just like a tenacious lawyer presenting her case to the toughest courts. And she won her case. On Thursday, March 20th, 1947, Dr. Herman removed 2 more ribs, which makes a total of 4 out of my right side. Now I have a question for all of you here. As a young girl, 20 years old, having already lived daily under these circumstances for 8 years, don't you think it's time that something truly exciting should happen in Clara's life? Monday, September 22nd, 1947. He looks so kind. I wonder who he is. My bed is by the window, so I've been able to watch the Whitney patients coming outside for lawn privileges all summer. There is one particular man who I watch for every day. He is the first patient who I have ever been interested in. He looks like a very nice man, and I feel certain that he is a very kind and trustworthy person. I kept this precious secret until today. Then I just had to ask someone about this man. I was told that his name is Harold Morey. Sunday, October 18th, 1947, and Clara had just turned 21 years old. The day was bright and beautiful, and the leaves are gorgeous, so when Dr. Carmichael made rounds today, I asked for a very special favor. I requested his permission just for today to go outside and sit on the bench underneath the tree by my window. Dr. Carmichael granted me my wish, and I was elated. No sooner was I seated on the bench this afternoon when the other patients swung into action. They coaxed Harold to come and meet me. Conversation came easily, and we talked incessantly. We sat together until it was time to return to our separate buildings. A wonderful, wonderful day. Now I wonder when I will see Harold again. And Clara has a footnote that she would not see him again until 1950, almost 2.5 years later. Friday, March 10th, 1950. Happy, happy day. I should be writing this in colored ink so it would stand out. Remember Harold? He is the gentleman who I used to watch from my window in 1947. We have not seen each other since that day when we sat together on the lawn bench. Today, Harold sent me some candy with another patient who came to visit at the preventorium. Harold is waiting to have a thoracoplasty operation. This has been a wonderful day. Thursday, October 26, 1950, 24 years old. Dr. Carmichael put me up for 10 minutes of daily exercise. I haven't been on exercise since 1942, 8 years ago. So it certainly will be strange walking down the street again. I am very happy. This has been a great day. And one of the things that my mother used to tell us when we were little was that the only problem they ever had with Clara when she was a little girl was that from the time she got out of bed in the morning until it was time for her to be tucked into bed at night, she had to be playing outdoors. And their problem was to get her in long enough to eat her meals. And so now this is the same person who's so happy that for the first time in 8 years she can go out for 10 minutes of daily exercise. And you'll remember what she did the last day when she got word of going to the sand. Went to school early in the morning so she could play ball, back to school at lunch to play ball. Monday, December 11th, 1950. Dr. Carmichael entered the workshop when Harold and I were speaking to each other, and he greeted us in a friendly way without making any snide remarks. They are so quick to say something when a sand romance is suspected, as that is a no-no around here. The doctor's favorite quote is, "Love and TB just don't mix." Sunday, August 15th, 1951. Harold came to visit me, and I was so surprised to see him again. I honestly feel that it would be impossible for heaven to contain greater happiness than what I experience whenever I am with Harold, and this thought really frightens me. If I have already reached the peak capacity for human happiness by just being with Harold, then the thought of marriage and even greater happiness would be impossible to obtain. Something would have to happen. The closest comparison that I can make, I think, would be to take a balloon and blow it to full capacity until one more breath would cause it to burst. I am filled to capacity with happiness when I am with Harold. More air will burst the balloon. More happiness would cause me to burst, and I would disintegrate. For this reason, there are times that I try to search for flaws in Harold, so I won't like him as much as I do. But it's no use. I never can find any faults. I always come to the same conclusion. Harold is just perfect, and I love him very much. Sunday, April 20th, 1952, 25 years old. I was summoned to the desk after breakfast, and for the second time in 5 weeks, Miss Clement informed me of the death of a loved one. Ralph had phoned to say that Dad passed away peacefully at 2 o'clock this morning. Thursday, October 16th, 1952, 26 years old. Even though moisture can still be heard in my left lung, the doctors are going to allow me to go home. And on November 7th, 1952, Clara wrote this rather poignant account. I am excited about going home, but I'm also quite apprehensive. I will have to remain on the pier at home and once again feel like a fish out of water. Dr. Harper said he hopes that I will surprise all of them and never have to return as a patient. Clara first entered the sand when she was 12, and she never again had to return to the sand after being discharged when she was 26. And although it was never expected that Clara would live past 20, she lived to be 71 years of age. Clara was always interested in other people's perceptions of things, and she would often ask me how, when I was small, I made sense of what was happening in our family with the whole tuberculosis situation. If someone had asked me as a small child what tuberculosis was, I would have had to really think about an answer because it's simply the way life was in our family. If pressed, I would likely have responded that it was a disease that took my father and my sisters and most of my brothers to a big hospital and that I could hardly ever get to see them. Because nobody under 16 years of age was allowed in to visit, I would have said that when I went along with my family to visit those in the sand, that I would stand on the lawn under the huge trees and try to find the window from whatever building the voice calling Anzie was coming. Then I would peer up at my father or whichever family member was waving from the window, and we would exchange some conversation. I would have said that it was often a very long time before I got to see them, and that I really, really missed them. I might have told about the time when I was 5 years old and in grade 1, and I took my doll along with me on the school bus one morning. When I got on the bus, the school bus driver asked me loudly, "Anne, does your doll have TB like everybody else in your family does?" I felt extremely uncomfortable with everyone looking at me and laughing, including the driver. And that was the defining moment for me, when I realized there was something unusual about TB. I definitely would have said as a child, and I would also say as an adult, that I had an extremely happy childhood. My parents were very strong people, and my mother was, quite simply, the wisest and most remarkable woman I have ever met. She had a resilience and attitude that was unbreakable. By the time my mother was 51, she had lost her husband and her eldest and youngest sons. Each of us was greatly influenced by my mother's ability to see the positives in life and maintain a good sense of humor and ability to laugh in spite of all the illness and challenges that she, my dad, and my family faced. And as Clara has shown time and again, the family history of TB never took that away from any one of us. One of the earliest lessons that my mother taught each of us when we were toddlers was that no matter how bad or how hopeless a day might look, that there was something beautiful in every single day if we just looked hard enough to find it. So it might be a gorgeous sunrise, the sparkling dew on the morning grass, the sound of the whippoorwill song as we were falling asleep, or a kind word or smile from a friend. My mother was a meticulous housekeeper, and germ warfare took on a whole new meaning in our household. I can remember my father dying at home when I was 8, like it was yesterday. My father faced death with dignity, faith, and the most radiant smile. All of us were gathered around his bed on a number of occasions when death seemed imminent. What I remember most vividly is the strong faith, prayers, the tears, and yes, there were lots of tears, the teasing and the laughter that we all shared. That room where my father lay dying was filled to overflowing with love and life. My brothers and sisters loved one another's company, and those who could spend hours playing games together, going for walks, talking, sharing an appreciation of reading and books, and being thoughtful of one another. Our friends were always welcome and were treated as one of the family, and they came often. So our home was a very happy home, and laughter, teasing, and pure joy with one another was the fabric of my years growing up. Every single morning that I lived at home, I awoke to the sound of my mother singing in the kitchen. In addition to 3 deaths, collectively my family members spent 40+ years either in the sand or at home on the cure. How different life would have been for we children if my parents had not had the faith and strength that they had. I am so grateful I never had TB, but I wish with all my heart that nobody else in my family had had it either. So is there time for
questions? Yes.
Okay. Any questions or comments?
And I do have a question. With all those years in bed, how did Clara get up physically and start to walk?
Well, I
No
know
physiotherapy.
that's the big question. I mean, she got to the stage where she could go to the bathroom once a day, but was very weak, obviously. And of course, having as many ribs removed as she did, her breathing capacity was only about, I think, between 40 and 60% when she came out of the hospital. So, balance, it was a challenge.
I can imagine.
Yeah. Any other, yes?
What happened to Harold? Did you keep in contact with him?
Well, I'm not sure if I should tell you what happened, or if you should read
Well,
the
it
book.
was a nice story, but it was tragic.
Do I, what's the vote? Do I tell what happened to Harold or not?
Yes.
No.
I would like a book.
Yes.
Clara seemed to depend a lot on her humor, or her humor brought her through a lot. Do you think she was very much like your mother? Because your mother appears to have been a very strong woman.
Oh, we were all like my mom and dad. My dad was very strong, but my dad died when I was younger. My mother had a remarkable sense of humor, even with all that went on. And I mean, she had all these children in the sand. And believe me, she was very sad about all that. So it's not like that part was funny. She just had this remarkable attitude to see funny. Our house was, isn't that right, Ralph? Our house was a house full of teasing and laughter. I mean, we just, yeah. Do you second that, Ralph?
Absolutely.
Yeah, it just was a really happy, fun home in spite. Now, if my parents had not been like that, we would not have turned out the same, I'm sure. Yes?
If TB is still occurring in Canada, are they still, my memory is when I was a child, they had somebody come to the house and you had to have a TB test done. I don't know, do they do that?
I think they still do in some schools and so on. And of course now with the drug therapy for TB, things are much different. So if people get it and have access to the drug therapy, they're usually cured within a few months, with very few of them having to go to hospital. But there is a drug-resistant strain of tuberculosis, which is a huge issue. And so at West Park Hospital in Toronto, they do have a TB ward yet for those cases. And there are some beds in the general hospital. that are used for that as well. And what's kind of interesting is my brother, Clara got out of the sand in 1952 after having spent almost 14 years in the sand. My brother Jim went into the sand in 1953 at age 14. His diagnosis was actually the same as what Clara's had been, but he had immediate access. The drugs had come in to effect then. So he was in hospital 2 years and no surgery as compared to what the others.
Would the drugs have done anything for Clara at that point?
She was at the very end. They came out, when they first came out, they first just tried using streptomycin because it was all trial and error and it didn't do anything for her. And then it took a long time for them to realize that it had to be a combination of 3 medications. So I think probably in the end, Ralph, you and Clara likely survived because those medications did come out finally in the last year.
I was the second person at the Royal Ottawa to get streptomycin.
What were the other drugs?
It was a parasacilic acid, which was like an aspirin. The bacilli apparently has a wax coating around it. And it wasn't, you couldn't get to it, so the acid would dissolve the wax, and then it would attack the bacilli, if I get the story right.
Yeah, so there was the streptomycin, the PAS that you're just talking about, and Rimifon, also called INH for short. And I think that's a lot that they use now for some people with latent TB if it becomes active.
So, and if Ralph and Clara had had TB 10 years earlier, they wouldn't have made it, would they, probably?
Probably not, probably not.
Just
And if they, I mean, and horrible as the surgeries were, it did save some lives. Actually, back to the question about the medications. When Ralph and Clara came home from the sand, they had these, now I thought, great big bottles of medication on the kitchen counter. And you literally took dozens of pills a day, like it was a huge.
24 days.
So a couple of years ago, I said to Ralph, I remember those great big bottles of pills. So the next time I went out to see Ralph, he said, I have something for you. Remember those great big bottles of pills? So that's one of the original bottles that Ralph still had. But honestly, I think they filled these out of bigger bottles. I'm pretty sure. Yes, Greg?
Richard?
Oh, okay, you heard me mention in the talk Dr. Pritchard. And when Clara left the sand, a lot of the doctors and nurses who had treated her for years kept up a very active correspondence with her until they died. And they just found it such a miracle that she had come out of the sand. So not that long ago, I still have boxes of Clara's diaries that I haven't even read yet. I mean, I just have a treasure trove of information. But I came across a package of letters that Dr. Pritchard had written Clara. And so one of them he wrote her when she'd been out for 30 years. And so he said, I can't believe I'm writing this letter 30 years after you left the sand, because we never thought you would ever leave. But he tells a funny little story in it. So across from the sand was a restaurant called Macy's. And sand patients, I'm sure not my brother Ralph, but some of the sand patients used to sneak out, if you can believe that. And so some of them used to go to this restaurant across the street, and some of them went to other places and did other things. But however, so some of them would go and get food at this restaurant. So Dr. Pritchard is telling Clara that he was sitting in a booth in Macy's one evening, and 3 girls from the crematorium, which was the building that Clara was in, came in and they couldn't see him, but he could hear them. So he could hear them saying, oh, we think we got across the street with nobody seeing us. If we can just get our food and get back across the street and get up those stairs and into our beds, we might just have pulled this off. So he didn't let on anything. Now, Clara did never sneak out. Clara prayed for the ones who did, that A, they wouldn't get caught, and B, their health wouldn't get worse. So anyway, he tells her he's one of the doctors who gave pneumothorax. So a couple weeks later, those 3 girls happened to be coming in at the same time too for pneumothorax. And the routine was their x-rays got posted on the wall, and the doctors would discuss the x-rays and say whether they were improving or getting worse. So apparently he took forever to examine their x-rays, and he could see that they were just getting more and more worried and upset, thinking that they were all going to get bad news. So finally he turned around and he said to them, "Doesn't matter from what angle I examine these x-rays, I just can't spot those hamburgers and french fries." So I guess they were just... Yes.
Why did you pick that title, Anne?
Okay. All right. When Clara had her 4th thoracolplasty surgery, she asked the doctors to save one of her ribs because she wanted to know what it looked like. So she had kept that forever, wrapped up in a paper towel in a plastic bag in a bureau dresser drawer. And a few days before she died, she took it out and she said to me, "Anne, when I die, you have to promise me that you will put this rib in my coffin. Because if you throw it in the garbage and it shows up in the landfill, or a dog goes sniffing it out, there are people going to be in there with bulldozers and excavators digging up the landfill to find the rest of the body that goes with the human rib." So the two of us laughed our heads off, knowing or visualizing what was happening, but both of us knowing, of course, that it was something I would be doing very soon. So a couple of days later, I did carry out her little directive with tears of laughter and sadness pouring down my cheeks. And then when I was praying really hard for a title for the book, it just finally came to me that there was no other title but Clara's Rib, which I can tell you she would find the funniest thing ever.
And Clara, she was in pretty good health, wasn't she? Because I only met her in 1983, but she always seemed quite well. She was quite well until she became ill with cancer, right? Was she?
Well, she had very, very reduced breathing capacity, so she always had a lot of lung issues, but got to do far more than she married, and they went camping and had a garden and so on, so way more than she ever had dreamed her life would hold. Those extra 50 years, every day was a miracle to her. But she rested a lot every day and just accommodated the health issues.
Did she keep a journal through the rest of her life?
She did, actually, yes. And I'm just in the midst of having someone read me all her former diaries as I'm typing them into the computer. And it's just amazing. More sand medical history that the doctors would love. And family history, very rich family history. I wanted to mention if any, because often where I speak, and there's been one person today, people who have, if you have any relatives that have been in the San in Ottawa or anything, I've been very involved in organizing for this November 1st, a reunion for former SAN patients and family members and former staff members and their family members of the Royal Ottawa SAN, and that's taking place at the facilities of the Royal Ottawa Mental Health Centre in Ottawa. So if any of you know of anyone who's ever been there or might be interested, or of anyone who had a family member who was in the SAN and they want to know what it was like, they're certainly very welcome to come for the day. I think it'll be an exciting day, so you can take my business card and there's all the information on my website about it.
Well, Anne, I'd like to thank you again for a very moving account of your book and of Clara's book, Clara's notes. I think this time is extra special because you actually brought show and tell with you in the form of Ralph.
Ralph and I had a great time last Wednesday
Couple of
Yes.
Wednesdays ago.
Yeah, on October the 8th, actually, we were interviewed by Leanne Cusick on CTV at noon about the reunion, so it was fun doing an interview with her all.
Wow. Thank you very much, and thank you, Anne, again for being with us. It's great. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Hold the ticket for the draw for Anne's book. Okay, the winning number is, okay, 0909839. And then we sign it for you.
And before we get up,
Thank you, Anne, it was very
she
much.
looks back there, and she'd be happy to sign for you. Thank you, and enjoy.